Let's have a look at business. Stephen's joining us on set, starting a massive overhaul of the tax system in the US. Big announcement by Donald Trump, wasn't it?
That's right, and the plan's been much anticipated by businesses and taxpayers in the United States, and even more so after Mr. Trump's #1 priority, which was overhauling Obamacare, failed to make it through Congress. The biggest changes in this plan are in taxes for businesses. The headline rate of corporation tax will fall from 35%, which is among the highest in the world, to 20%. There's also going to be big changes around how companies that earn money abroad are going to be taxed. American companies currently have a record $1.3 trillion stash outside of the United States. But what Mr. Trump wants to do is to have a one-off tax to allow those companies to bring that money back to the United States, which he says will help to create jobs there. In addition, for those companies working abroad, they're also no longer going to have to pay tax on profits they earn abroad. That's a change from the current system where they do.
What about ordinary individual taxpayers then, Stephen?
The tax system is going to get a lot simpler. There are currently 7 tax bands for personal taxation in the United States, the highest of which is at 39%. That's going to shrink to just 3, the highest of which will be 35%. So those on the highest rate of tax will pay less. Generally, the deduction that everyone gets in their taxes will double to $12,000 for an individual and $24,000 for a family. The president also wants to scrap the federal inheritance tax, which currently applies to estates of just under $5.5 million. That's going to be a tax break that's particularly going to favour wealthy Americans.
Does sound like pretty big plans. How's he going to pay for it, though, Stephen?
Well, first of all, let's take a listen to what Donald Trump had to say after announcing this plan. He said that the plan was going to make the tax cuts more competitive.
The current tax system is a colossal barrier standing in the way of America's economic comeback because it can be far greater than it's ever been. But we're going to remove that barrier to create the tax system that our people finally and want and deserve.
So big ambitions, and the question of how to pay for it is a big question. We've only got rough calculations so far because, of course, it was only announced yesterday. I've been looking at one estimate coming from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. They say it'll be $2.2 trillion that this will cost the United States over the next 10 years. The White House says it'll make up some of that shortfall from closing tax loopholes. President Trump believes that these tax cuts will boost growth in the United States to such an extent that they won't need to have, that will provide more revenue in and of itself. Economists saying, though, it won't be enough. This will have to add to America's national debt, which is already over $20 trillion. And of course, all of this plan still has to go through Congress, so it could end up in a very different form to how it is now.
What about the markets then, Stephen? How are they reacting to that?
Well, shares on Wall Street did rise. The dollar got stronger too after the announcement from Donald Trump. In Asia today, investors are a little bit more unsure about what's happened. Market analysts there saying they're wondering how much of this plan will survive the passage through Congress. The Nikkei in Tokyo finishing up 0.5%, but falls in Shanghai and in Hong Kong. Over in Europe, trading just getting underway in the past few minutes. European investors a little bit less excited about what's going on in the United States. We're keeping an eye on the shares of Fincantieri, the Italian shipbuilder in Italy. Those shares up 2% after it was confirmed yesterday they would be taking over France's biggest shipyards. Gains too for the engineering company Alstom here in Paris after their merger announced with Siemens earlier this week. Let's take a look at some more of the day's business headlines for you now. Representatives of Twitter will speak to members of the US Congressional Committee later as part of their investigation into Russian influence in the 2016 American election. They're likely to face questions over the spread of fake news via automated bot accounts. The meeting will be private, but Twitter, Facebook and Google will face public questions from the committee members in November. South Korea is offering to help companies hurt by Chinese trade sanctions. Tourism and the motor industry have been hurt by boycotts imposed by Beijing. That's after the United States deployed an anti-missile system to protect South Korea. The Seoul government is allowing firms to defer their taxes or offering them cheap loans to ease financial pressure. And Google is to split its shopping arm into a separate business to satisfy demands from EU regulators. The internet giant was fined €2.4 billion by the European Commission for unfairly promoting its own services in search results. Google is appealing the fine, but complying with the EU's other demands.
Now, the story of a Chinese news website that borrowed a well-known brand, not ours.
Not ours. This is a story that the Financial Times discovered when they came across a Chinese version of the Washington Post newspaper, only to discover that the original publication didn't know anything about it. Now, Sun News does pay to syndicate content from the Washington Post, but it didn't have permission to use either the masthead or to imitate the layout of the US newspaper. You can see what it used to look like there in that article. This is what the website looks like now, though, after the FT contacted both publications. The site has been changed. The Washington Post's content is still there, but looks a little bit less familiar. Sun Media, for its part, says that it didn't overstep its contract and that it's aiming to target global Chinese intellectuals with its content.
Yes, there was a slight similarity, wasn't there?
A little bit.
Thanks, Stephen. Stephen with Business on France 24.